Home, where we live, where our hearts live. This is where we derive our sense of belonging, our sense of who we are. We may travel, but we return home. We leave permanently only under duress. And in today's world, at the start of the 21st century, some 50 million people have had to flee, leaving their beloved homes behind. Wars and political volatility force many of them to leave their communities, seeking refuge in neighboring countries. Lives in danger, people who can't go home, they settle in camps or try to survive day by day in host countries, with days lengthening into years. Their keenest wish is for peace, allowing them to return home. In some cases, that will never be possible. There are refugees who can never go home, and some, for protection or health reasons, cannot safely stay in the countries that first gave them temporary asylum. These refugees urgently need resettlement. They need sponsors who will give them the opportunity to build a new home. Canada is one of a number of countries in the world that annually offers resettlement to several thousand refugees through a government refugee resettlement program. In addition, Canada also has a private refugee sponsorship program that allows groups to offer refugees abroad a chance to resettle in Canada. There is no limit to the number of refugees who may be resettled through private sponsorship. Groups of 5 or more permanent residents or citizens can sponsor refugees. Groups may also be connected with one of over 65 organizations that have an agreement with the government to regularly sponsor refugees. These organizations are known as Sponsorship Agreement Holders, or SAHs. Sponsorship Agreement Holders will help sponsors with every aspect of the sponsorship, from preparing an application, planning for the refugee's arrival, working with the refugee family after they come to Canada, and assisting with resources, training, and information. However, not all refugees qualify for Canadian sponsorship. If you are considering sponsoring a refugee who has been brought to your group's attention, consult your SAH for help to ensure that the application has a good chance for success. Your sponsorship agreement holder can also help to match your group to a refugee in urgent need of resettlement. To avoid disappointment, and before making any promises, make sure that your group knows who qualifies for private sponsorship to Canada. To be admitted to Canada, all refugees and immigrants must pass medical examinations and security and criminality checks. They are also assessed on their ability to establish and become independent in Canada. To be eligible for refugee sponsorship to Canada, a person must be either a convention refugee seeking resettlement, a member of the country of asylum class, or a member of the source country class. An applicant for private refugee sponsorship to Canada in the convention refugee or asylum class must be a person who has suffered persecution, civil war, armed conflict, or massive human rights violations, who has fled and is now unable to return to their home country within a reasonable period of time, who has no prospect of integrating into their country of asylum, for whom resettlement becomes the only durable solution. Private sponsorship is also possible under the source country category, which is limited to certain countries. This is a person who is suffering persecution or massive human rights violations, is still in their home country, needs resettlement for protection and is a durable solution. You need to have enough information about a refugee's situation to evaluate whether they might meet Canada's selection requirements. If the refugee is in need of resettlement, prepare the application very carefully, with help from your sponsorship agreement holder, before submitting it to Citizenship and Immigration Canada. don't skip over details that could prove to be highly important. Research and prepare carefully to avoid refusals. There is no formal appeal of a negative decision. If you think that the refugee situation will not qualify for any of Canada's refugee programs, submitting a sponsorship for them would only result in disappointment. Consider sponsoring a refugee identified overseas as in need of resettlement by the Canadian government or by an SAH. They may already have been interviewed by a visa officer and are just waiting for a sponsor to offer them a second chance at life in Canada. By ensuring that refugees you agree to sponsor are in need of resettlement and documenting their case clearly on paper, you will have good grounds to apply for their acceptance under Canada's private sponsorship program. The Asghani family fled their home in southern Iran for reasons of political persecution, going first to Pakistan, then to India. Persecution of their ethnic group caused them to flee Iran, and they could not safely stay in India, where Iranian authorities continued to seriously harass them. Their situation came to the attention of a human rights organization who contacted a sponsorship agreement holder in Canada. The Lutheran Friends with Refugees group was asked to sponsor the Asghani family.
Initially is kind of to sense whether Canadian people, in our particular case, whether the churches would be willing to sponsor this size family. And so there's a lot of public relations kinds of things, of talking to people, encouraging them, you know, how many churches do you think will be involved, and then finally making the decision, yes, we think we'll have enough support from people and in the time frame. So you say, okay, we'll fill in the forms and send them off and pray to God that people will come through and support, and it's a continuing process of finding the people, the energy, the furnishings, the clothing, considering what the food needs will be, what the housing needs will be, what is their potential employment possibilities, how old are the children, what are their skills, what's the English level. All kinds of questions go through your mind, and as you're assessing how much the committee needs to do and finding the support.
In addition to the preparation of the sponsors in Canada, the applicants' preparation for their personal interviews with Canadian visa officers is a key part of the process. The visa officer uses the interview and the information presented in the sponsorship application to determine whether they are eligible to be accepted for resettlement in Canada.
Are there any general comments anyone wants to make about the case study process?
Bev Aldridge is a former visa officer working in the field for 5 years.
In many of the private sponsorships, the applications are initiated in Canada because the sponsor is aware of the individual. That person is made known to them. So the application goes over to the visa office, who then mails out an application to the refugee. When it comes back to the office, then they'll have a look at it, get any additional documentation they need, and then invite the refugee in for an interview. The person may be in a camp. We sometimes have to travel to the camps or to different corners of the country to do the interviews, but very often they're able to come to our embassy and we interview them there. And then if they meet the basic eligibility requirements, they also have to pass a medical and security assessment. And then we will issue them a visa to travel to Canada. That's where they meet up with their private sponsor, and the sponsor helps them settle here.
Understanding who Canada accepts as refugees for private sponsorship is very important, because at the moment, over 50% of applicants are refused. People who have left their country of origin for economic reasons, or those who are integrated into their country of asylum, are usually not eligible for resettlement to Canada.
We don't always maybe assess the situation, assess who is being sponsored, and many times, requests come from relatives or friends here for their relatives to be sponsored. And of course we want to help and we want to do, we want to make it a better life for them. But if they don't really meet the refugee definition, then they're sure to be refused because they're not going to be eligible. They're not going to meet the eligibility requirements. I think it's important that we don't lead the person making the request on, especially if it's a family member, that we give them some, we're giving them then some kind of false hope, and we're saying we can do this when really, if we maybe look at the situation a little deeper and find out who the person is and what are they claiming in terms of their refugee status, maybe we know right away that they wouldn't meet the definition and we shouldn't lead them on. The same for the church, because a church, when they do a sponsorship, they're getting excited, they're getting involved, they're getting their people together to prepare for the arrival, and they get all excited and their hope gets all built up, and when a rejection comes, it really destroys that sponsorship and it makes it very difficult to try to get them on board for another one.
In Kitchener,